The face of every Pokemon generation are the starters. Which of the three will you choose? That's the question every trainer must answer whenever they play the new installments. Will they choose Sprigatito? Will they choose Quaxly? Or will they choose Fuecoco? And that obviously leads into another question. Which one of these are the best? If we go to the OU Viability Rankings, which is the most popular Smogon metagame for Pokemon, we gotta look on down here. We go to A- rank, we have Skeledirge. In B+ rank, we have Quaquaval. In B rank, we have Meowscarada. So all three of the starters are viable in the most popular format. But what about their pre-evolutions? What about the ones that everybody was looking forward to? Sprigatito, Quaxly, and Fuecoco. How viable are those three? Today, I'm going to be going over how viable are the starters in Scarlet and Violet Little Cup. I'm the Shoddy Strawman. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you could like, share, and subscribe, I'd very much appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to go with Sprigatito first. That's everybody's most favorite Pokemon. At least most favorite starter. Everybody really liked how Sprigatito was looking. They thought Fuecoco was also neat, and then people were kind of mid on Quaxly. At least that's my personal experience. So I'm going to go with that. So, what does Sprigatito do? So, because of its ability Protein, you change your type into the type of the move that you're using. So, for example, if I use U-Turn on Sprigatito, it will turn into a bug type, and it will be granted same type attack bonus on that U-Turn, which is always really valuable, meaning that every attack that you go with on Sprigatito has a 50% boost. However, it is important to note that Protein got a nerf in this generation, meaning that's only once per switch-in. As a result, you can't just spam a whole bunch of moves. For example, if I want to use Play Rough and then have Stab my Sucker Punch afterwards, I cannot do that. I will stay as a Fairy type from Play Rough. Then we can look at the stats. They're pretty alright. We have 40 base HP, which has a good interaction with Life Orb, which we'll get into in a second. 61 base attack is alright, but you'd much rather have something higher. You have serviceable bulk, good defense, good special defense, and then you have 65 base speed, which gets you up to 17 speed at level 5. Now, the important interaction with Life Orb with your HP is that if you reduce your IVs, you get up to 19 HP. The reason why that's important is if we go to Life Orb, holders' attacks do 1.3 times damage, and you lose 1/10 of your max HP after each attack. Because Pokemon loves rounding down, instead of going to 2, because you have 1.9, you get 19 charges of Life Orb because it only takes 1 HP of recoil every time you attack, which is always really valuable. You can also do a more bulky Sprigatito, make it more utility-based, have Taunt, Sucker Punch, U-Turn, Play Rough, have some pretty good utility moves here. And then you can also run a Choice Scarf set. And the reason why that's important is that your speed set is 17, so the reason why you want to have it so high, you want to have it up to 14 as a minimum for your Choice Scarf users. And the reason for that is that we have really fast Pokemon in the tier, such as this Girafarig. It gets up to 19 base speed at maximum investment, so being faster than that is always exceedingly valuable. Because Choice Scarf only gives you a 50% boost, and once again, Pokemon loves rounding down, your 13 speed only goes up to 19, so speed tying something that's pretty fast isn't always valuable, so what you always want to do is have it higher than that. As a result, you want to have a very fast Scarfer. Some examples of some pretty good ones are Magnemite. It gets up to 15 speed, which will turn into 22. We have Pawniard, which gets up to 24 with its 16 at level 5. And Sprigatito beats both of them and gets up to 25. It's exceedingly valuable because you are a revenge killer that kills other revenge killers. Because of how fast you are, you're not only useful against the majority of the metagame, you are useful against even the niche cases when they want to be faster than everything else, which is exceedingly valuable. So that begs the question, where is Sprigatito in the viability rankings? The answer is, it's not even on there. If we even go down to C rank, if we go down to D rank, it's not there. Why is that? You know how I said that Girafarig is a 19 speed Pokemon that's really valuable? It's the tier king, so it's on borderline every single team. And the reason why that's important is that Girafarig has the ability Sap Zipper, which gives it a grass immunity, and if it's hit by a grass move, it gets an attack raise of 1 stage. So what that means is that one of the biggest reasons to run Sprigatito, which is its grass typing, is completely blanked by Girafarig. Now, obviously, you can still run, like, you know, U-turn, Sucker Punch, Play... Like, obviously, those are still good into it. But it's really hard to justify using a Sprigatito when, like, Grass Stab, that will be one of the biggest reasons to use it, over Scorbunny, which is also in the tier currently, is just blanked by Girafarig. And speaking of Scorbunny, there's a whole bunch of other competition for Sprigatito, including Scorbunny. But Scorbunny, it has a Choice Scarf, it gets up to the same speed stat as Sprigatito. It has a higher attack stat, it's got more HP, so it can't be a Life Orb user, but it has a better, it's more effective as a Choice Scarf user. You still have U-turn, you still have Sucker Punch, and then the two stabs that you get, besides, you know, these two moves that you always want to run, are Flare Blitz, which Scorbunny just got this generation because of how X moves work, but you have Flare Blitz now. 120 base power is exceedingly powerful, and then you also have High Jump Kick, which is 130 base power. Both of these are stupidly powerful, significantly more powerful than Petal Blizzard and Play Rough. So why ever run Sprigatito when you have like this competition right there? Also, for the other sets, we have Voltorb. It gets up to 20 at level 5. So if you want to run a Life Orb Sprigatito, why not just run Life Orb Voltorb instead? It's got better bulk with 50 defense, 55 special defense, and the absurdly fast. It's absurdly fast. So even stuff like Girafarig can't outspeed Voltorb, which is exceedingly valuable. You still have a switch move in Volt Switch. You have a good stab option in Thunderbolt. And for the things that have an immunity to your Thunderbolt and Volt Switch, you have Terra Blast Ice. So it's all really valuable. And then you also have a really fast taunt, meaning that even if your opponent is running something like an 18 speed Pokemon such as Deerling, which wants to use something like Synthesis or Thunder Wave, well, you can just shut that down. It has to go into its attacking moves, which can always be exceedingly valuable. As a Scarfer, why not use Zorua or Mankey instead? They both reach 17 speed, and Zorua is exceedingly valuable because you still have Sucker Punch, you still have U-turn, but most importantly, you have the best move in Little Cup, Knock Off, which removes items, and the reason why that's important is if we go over this Glimmet, the Eviolite boosts your defense and special defense by 1.5 times. And removing that on any Pokemon throughout the course of the game is exceedingly valuable. And having that on Stab on Zorua, it can be really hard to deal with. In addition, you also can just do Terra Blast for coverage, do Terra type Fairy, and it covers fighting types that would otherwise annoy Zorua, which is really nice. And if that doesn't strike your fancy of just like, oh, you know, Zorua's kind of gimmicky, it's got illusion, I don't really want to run that something that's kind of really weird to pilot, well then, you can just run Mankey instead. It's a 17 speed Scarfer that has a higher attack stat than both Zorua, Scorbunny, and Sprigatito. So it's the most powerful attacker of all three. It's got a fantastic 120 base power close combat, which does not have the downsides of Scorbunny's high jump kick of if you miss, you lose half your health. You have U-turn for once again keeping momentum, and then because you're a Generation 1 Pokemon, you have an absurdly large pool of moves to go from. So we have Earthquake, that'll get you over some poison types such as Glimmet, but then you also have options such as Fire Punch, Gunk Shot, Outrage, Overheat if you want to be specially offensive and be cheeky. You have Rock Slide, Seed Bomb, Shadow Claw, Stone Edge, Thunder Punch. You have so many moves that you can use on a Mankey Choice Scarf set that can make it really hard for your opponent to predict. When it comes to Scorbunny and Sprigatito, it's very often just going to be the same stuff. There's very little variance. But Mankey, it can do whatever it wants, and it can do it really effectively. It's really hard to beat. Next up we have Glimmet, and the reason why I have this here is because Toxic Spikes are everywhere, especially as a result of Glimmet's introduction. The reason why is because Toxic Debris, if this Pokemon is hit by a physical attack, Toxic Spikes are set on the opposing side, so it's really hard to be able to deal with Toxic Spikes as a Sprigatito when, like, oh yeah, you could use Taunt, but then you immediately die to stuff like Sludge Bomb or Power Gem, just because of how strong they are in Glimmet. But the other issue is that people really don't want to be hampered by Toxic Spikes, so as a result, you'll run a grounded poison, such as Marinear Fungus. and Marianne and Fungus both completely dumpster Sprigatito. So as a result of Toxic Spikes being existing, why ever run Sprigatito? And if you even want to run a defensive grass type, why not run Deerling? It's got Thunder Wave for good team support to paralyze the enemy, it's got Synthesis to keep itself healthy, and then its ability Serene Grace doubles secondary effect chances, meaning that stuff like Headbutt and Zen Headbutt have a 60% chance on Headbutt and a 40% chance on Zen Headbutt, respectively, to flinch. So you can just get a whole bunch of free damage and your opponent can't do anything about it. And if you have Toxic Spike support such as Glimmet, having all of these free turns can be exceedingly dangerous for your opponent to deal with. Also, if you don't want to run Headbutt and be annoying, you can also run Body Slam, which is higher base power and a 60% chance to paralyze your opponent. It's pretty crazy. People aren't exactly the biggest fan of the set because it's just para-flinch heaven, but why run Sprigatito when you could just run Deerling instead? That brings us to Fuecoco. What does Fuecoco want to do? Well, because of the ability Unaware, it ignores other Pokemon's stat changes when doing or taking damage. And the reason why that's important is that means that stuff like Setup Girafarig can't just break over it with nasty blood boosts. And what I mean by that is, if Girafarig uses a nasty plot and gets a +2 special attack boost, Fuecoco will simply ignore it and act as if it's not there, which is exceedingly valuable for a wall. You also have a good support move pool. You have Will-O-Wisp for burning physical attackers, you have Slack Off for keeping yourself healthy, and you have Roar to force out opponents. Like, if you want to deal with Girafarig and your opponent's just like, oh, well, I'll just nasty plot a whole bunch of times. Fuecoco is way too passive. It can't do anything to me. Well, then I can just roar you out, and then all of your boosts are gone, and you have to find another setup opportunity that isn't now. So there's that. You also have a pretty good amount of other utility moves. You have Yawn and Stomping Tantrum. I don't recommend this as a set. It's just that if you want to run Stomping Tantrum for poison types, as well as rock types, like all that stuff that would normally wall Fuecoco, then you have the option to do so. You also have Yawn if you want to spread a different status as opposed to Burn, because Yawn can get you a couple free turns, cause your opponent to have a really awkward few switches. It can be really valuable as a utility move. So where exactly is Fuecoco here? Because I mean, like, although it has less set utility, like there's a lot less that it's going to do compared to Sprigatito. Because Sprigatito could do like a Scarf set, a Life Orb set. Well then, where's Fuecoco? The answer is it's actually in B tier. It's not bad. It's not fantastic. It's not awful. The main reason for that is it's got some competition, and like it's not bad because, you know, it's a wall with recovery, but there's also a lot of other walls with recovery that you would want to run otherwise. For example, we have Marianne. It's got Regenerator. It's got Recover. Regenerator, every time you switch out, you gain 1/3 of your maximum HP, which means that even if your wall is being very passive and switching out and going to another mon, you're still getting progress with Marianne because you can heal back some HP. But you also have Surf as a pretty good move to hit your opponents. Sludge Bomb, so that way you can attack into them as well as poison them. And then if you're worried about setup sweepers, you can run Haze. If you're not too worried about setup sweepers, you can run Toxic Spikes. You can also run Toxic if you want to be really cheeky. In addition, your stats are just pretty absurd with how bulky you can get, especially when boosted by Eviolite. I mean, it's an option. Like, the main issue is that you still die really hard to Girafarig because it just comes in. Your poison type doesn't really... Marianne does not want to see Girafarig because Girafarig can very easily kill it with Twin Beam or Psychic. But what does give it a pretty good advantage over Fuecoco, as I mentioned before, Toxic Spikes are everywhere. You want to get rid of Toxic Spikes. However, if you have a grounded poison such as Marianne, you can remove those Toxic Spikes without having to spin them away because you're a grounded poison type that absorbs them. So, it's a very valuable trait to have. Next up we have Larvesta, and it's pretty big competition for the biggest reason of it's also a defensive fire type. It has Flame Body, so you have a 30% chance of whenever your opponent has a contact move, such as Flare. Well, I'm going to take a tick here. Knock Off, Play Rough, those sorts of moves that make contact with your opponent. There's a 30% chance that when your opponent does that into your Larvesta, that they will be burned afterwards, which is really valuable as a wall because that means that physical attackers are heavily de-incentivized from attacking into you. It could just mean that they get burned and all you did was switch in on the correct Pokemon. Pretty valuable. But you also have Flare Blitz is good stab. You have U-Turn, which is the really big thing, because being able to get some momentum. So, for example, if your opponent has a Mariani in their back, and they're like, you know what, in order to deal with this Larvesta, I'm going to go to Mariani. It can resist both the stab Flare Blitz and the stab U-Turn. It should be fine. However, Larvesta just U-turns out. That means that you get momentum back on your side, and your opponent's stuck with Mariani in, and your Larvesta's out. That means that you're outside of the bad matchup, meaning that you can go into something more valuable, well, with a better matchup versus Mariani, such as Girafarig, such as Diglett, such as another Psychic type like Gothita, in order to deal with Mariani. You have options. You also have Will-O-Wisp as good burn, so that way if your opponent's switching around, or if you just really need that burn on something, you can go for that. And you still have reliable recovery with Morning Sun. And then if we go to your stats, 55 HP, 55 defense, 55 special defense, really bulky. You also have base 85 attack, meaning that even without investment, you're still exceedingly threatening. And you have a pretty good speed tier, so that means that you're not going to be too far behind if your opponent starts doing some cheeky things. Like, you're faster than other walls, and that can be really valuable. Excuse me. Because that means that even if they're like, oh, well, I can just use Surf into your Larvesta with my Mariani. Well, you're too fast, you turn out, it's all A-okay. Next up, I have Tinkatink on here. It's not, the biggest parallel. The reason why I have it on there is that it's pretty good at stopping sweeping, as well as being a utility mon. It's got Knockoff to remove items. It's got Play Rough as a really good stab move. It's got Thunder Wave, so that way if a sweeper such as Girafarig wants to come in and try to set up on this, it can't, because then it'll just be slower after the Thunder Wave. In addition, you have Stealth Rocks, which can hurt foes on switch-in and factors Rock Weakness. If you're wondering why Larvesta is considered kind of bad, that's why. It has Bug Fire typing, and although it's pretty good defensively, it has a horrible Stealth Rock weakness, meaning that every time it'll switch in when Stealth Rocks are up, it loses half of its health, which is absurdly bad. But Tinkatink's pretty valuable as a result of having all of this utility, and being able to still be kind of active despite being very passive with its moveset. The main issue is that its attack set's 45, which is frankly abhorrent. If we go back to Larvesta, even without investment, it's already 2 points higher than Tinkatink. Tinkatink has a really hard time attacking into things and doing a lot of damage. It's almost pure utility. Whereas with Fuecoco, it can do... I'd say it can do much more. Because you have Roar to shuffle up your opponent's lineup, put them into a very unfavorable spot. Stuff like that. This is just very passive, and you can always know what they're doing. Next up is Shellos. It's on here because it has Clear Smog, so instead of just being unaware and not thinking about your opponent's changes, you can actively remove them, so that's pretty nice. You also have Stealth Rock, as well as Recover to keep yourself healthy, and then you have Surf as a pretty nice stab option. You're also a blanket check to rain teams because you have Storm Drain. It can be really hard to break over sometimes because your bulk is 76 HP, 46 defense, 62 special defense. It can be really hard to break over. It's not perfect because you have to attack into your opponent with Clear Smog for it to work. If your opponent has a already set up Girafarig, then it can be really hard for Shellos to come in, take quite a bit of damage, and then get rid of the stat boost, so that can be kind of inconvenient. Not to mention, there's a bit of opportunity cost with using Clear Smog. You want to be able to hit stuff like Toad School, so you want to run Ice Beam or something like that. So, it's an option, but Fuecoco is much better as a solid, just like, oh, well, I want to get rid of Setup Sweeper's option. But this can be used for other situations. The next two we have, they're kind of there. Like, Foongus is a physical wall. Snover's also a physical wall. Like, they're both walls, but they kind of do different things because Foongus is more about Regenerator, Synthesis, Spore support, so that way you can sleep your opponents, which can be really valuable in giving you a free turns, and then keep yourself healthy with Giga Drain. It's not bad, but the main issue is that you lose really hard to Girafarig, which can be really, really annoying to deal with. And then Snover's here just because Snow got a rework in this generation. It's now a 1.5 times defense boost for all ice types as opposed to doing chip damage every turn, meaning that this Snover gets up to 33 defense in Snow, which is the equivalent to an Eviolite on an Onix, which is frankly absurd. So, like, these are all options, but Fuecoco still stands out among the rest of them for being unaware of stat changes. Of course, Larvesta can still burn things and have that as its role, and then Mariani can still be a really good support Pokemon. But Fuecoco is very, very, very good for dealing with setup sweepers, and it can be really hard to deal with. And then the final mon that we have is Quaxly. And if you're wondering, well, where is Quaxly in all of this? Because, I mean, Sprigatito was pretty disappointing. Fuecoco was middling. The good news for you guys is that Quaxly is A tier on the viability rankings. Let's go! Despite the fact that he's a little unassuming, he is exceedingly good. And what makes him that way? Well, he's got Roost for reliable recovery, meaning that it can take a lot of hits, keep itself healthy over the course of the game. It's got Rapid Spin, which removes you from hazards, so stuff like Stealth Rock that would otherwise ruin stuff like Larvesta, you can get rid of with Quaxly. You have good Stab and Liquidation, and then you also have Brave Bird for coverage, so even grass types can't wall this effectively, even though they should normally. And somehow, Moxie is the most broken ability of the three. What Moxie does is that whenever you KO another Pokemon, you get an attack raise. So, if you kill something with Rapid Spin, you've effectively given yourself a Dragon Dance. As a result, you are a wall that is exceedingly threatening that your opponent has to dance around constantly. It's pretty funny. Even though you're supposed to be very defensive, you're like, oh, you know, I have a lot of defense investment, I have a lot of HP, I keep myself healthy with Roost. Your opponent still has to keep this in check as a threat, because if it gets one Moxie boost, it can win games. It's crazy. You also have some other utility moves. So for example, this Quaxly has Aqua Jet. If you want to, you can also run Encore. I've also seen some ladder heroes running 4 attacks Quaxly to take full advantage of the Moxie boost, because you can do Rapid Spin, and then you have Liquidation and Aqua Jet as good water moves. Aqua Jet meaning that it's really hard to revenge kill you, and then you can Terra type water to make them even more threatening, and then if your opponent has a grass type, you still have Brave Bird for that, and it can be really hard to deal with. Obviously, this is significantly more niche than, like, you know, this set, because you have Roost on this as well as Rapid Spin for more general utility, but this can still do a lot of work. And you may be thinking, oh, well, you know, there's probably other mons that can do something similar, you know, be defensive but still offensively threatening. Not really. It's kind of funny. The biggest competition that you have is Marianne, because it's so good as a water-type wall that can still get T-Spikes. But you can still get, well, it can deliver T-Spikes as well as absorb them. However, you still have Rapid Spin to remove hazards, so that's always nice. And then Toadschool is your next most common competition, and the reason for that is because it's got Rapid Spin in and of itself. It's got Knockoff, so that way you can remove your opponent's Eviolites to make them squishier. Then you also have stuff like Power Whip as good Grass Stab, 120 base power. It can be really helpful for Marianne, Quaxly, the Toadschool Mirror, but then you also have stuff like Earth Power in order to deal with, once again, Marianne. You have the Steel types, such as Tinkatink and Pawniard. You deal with that stuff really well. And then you also have Spore in order to sleep your opponent, so that way you can get some free turns. You also have stuff like Spikes, you have Toxic Spikes, so Toadschool as a mon is an absolute unit. It can do whatever you really need it to do. Earth Power, Knockoff, Rapid Spin Spikes, anything that you want. You want pressure on your opponent's switches, you want to have certain things that you want to break over because you think that your team's kind of weak to them. It can do everything. But it can't do what Quaxly does because its ability Mycelium Might, although good, what it does is that your status moves go last in the priority bracket and ignore abilities. So even though Spore is a grass-type move, and as I mentioned before, Girafarig loves taking grass-type moves because of its ability Sap Zipper, the issue is it doesn't have the grass immunity because of Mycelium Might, meaning that it can still get slept by Toadschool, which is really valuable. But once again, why not just run Quaxly if you want to have this really good offensive pressure, this really hard-to-resist stab combination, as well as keeping itself healthy. When it comes to Toadschool, it can be hard to stay around for a lot of the game because your most reliable recovery is Giga Drain, and that is blocked by Sap Zipper by Girafarig, and it's not exactly the most damaging of moves. So as a result, Quaxly has this really, really, really valuable niche as a very offensive yet defensive Pokemon. It can take a whole bunch of hits because of how bulky it is naturally. Rapid Spin means that you remove hazards, and then having stab water moves can be really hard to switch into. It's really crazy, because somehow the most popular one, Sprigatito, got the worst, somehow was like the worst one in Little Cup. But then we have Fuecoco, which was, you know, kind of popular, and that was kind of good as a result. And then the least popular one is Quaxly. Dude, it's the best one. It's kind of funny how that works out, huh? And then just as a quick comparison between OU and Little Cup, Meowscarada and Sprigatito, once again, are the kind of worst ones. But in overused, Fuecoco and Quaxly switch places. Fuecoco is better because Skeledirge is A- rank. Having a much more bulkier unaware Pokemon is really nice. But then Quaquaval is not too far behind because of Moxie Boost and Aqua Step. It's pretty interesting to see how, despite the fact that, you know, this is the baby version of those Pokemon, they all do exactly what their fully evolved counterparts want to do anyway. You know, Fuecoco still wants to wall, Sprigatito, despite being kind of bad, still wants to attack, and Quaxly, it even has more utility than Quaquaval because of the fact that it can do Rapid Spin and is a bulky yet very offensively threatening sweeper. Quaquaval can only attack. It's pretty crazy. As a result, Quaxly is the best starter in Little Cup. It's pretty crazy. Thank you very much for coming in and watching my video. I really appreciate it. If you could like, share, and subscribe, I would also really appreciate that. Leave a comment down below of which of the three you think is your favorite, and always be sure to have a good day.